So hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. Thank you for joining us. My name is Jenna Dutton. I'm the co-chair of the Commonwealth Women in Planning Network. And I'm joined by Charlotte Morfitt and our lovely panelists, one of which will hopefully join us shortly. So as you probably saw when you signed up for the session, the title is Women in Planning, Rights, Justice, and Action in Practice. So it's a global planning discussion. And we're lucky to have four esteemed panelists from across the globe with us today. And the goal is to help the participants, so all of you joining us, to deepen your understanding of what gender responsive planning looks like in practice and explore global frameworks that translate into local action. And then we'll leave you with some concrete insights that hopefully will be applicable to your own professional context and work. And I'll give it over to you, Charlotte.
Yeah, just a brief hello from me. As Jen said, my name is Charlotte Morfitt. I'm the program leader for the MSc in Urban Planning at the University of the Built Environment, who are hosting this webinar on behalf of ISOCARP and the Commonwealth Women in Planning Network. So on behalf of the University of the Built Environment, I would just like to extend a very warm welcome to you all. We're delighted to be hosting this webinar and to have you all joining us virtually today. And just a huge thanks for being here. I'll pop in the chat a bit more about the university because we've had a bit of a name change, so you can see a bit more information in case anybody's interested in any of our programs. Thank you.
Okay, so I think we want to get right to the great part. So we'll move right ahead with the panel discussion. So we're just going to do some brief introductions of our panelists. So Aisha, could you start us off with a brief introduction, please?
Sure. I am Aisha Donaldson. I'm a senior land use planner and head of the policy development unit at the Ministry of Planning, Economic Affairs and Development in my country, Trinidad and Tobago. I have over 20 years in the planning field. I had mentorship from the Canadian Institute of Planners in my early career. I've worked in the local government system for a number of years, and now I'm at the Central Planning Authority, basically, and I hope to advance the cause of gender equality over the next few years.
Amazing. Awesome to have you joining us. Thank you.
Yes.
And Sylvia, can you go next? Oh, no, sorry, not Sylvia. Angela, my apologies.
No problem. Well, it's hard to say if it's good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. So depending on where you are, I'm Angela Brooks. I have the pleasure of serving as the Chief Housing and Urban Development Officer for the Mayor of the City of Philadelphia, working for the first woman mayor of Philadelphia, who happens to also be the 100th mayor, just to put in context how old we are as a city, and we're just getting our first woman mayor. Gender equity becomes kind of it's just a big part of our job just because of the historic role that she feels that she's filling at the moment, as well as just a lot of the work that we're doing specifically around housing, a lot of women-led households. So doing a lot of equity and transferring of wealth and that kind of things that comes with women-led households. So we'll talk about that a little later. Thank you for having me. Oh, and I should also mention I'm the immediate past president, national president of the American Planning Association. So super excited to join you guys.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining us. And last but not least for now, Penina, could you introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you so much. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Penina Ndegwa. I'm an urban planner. I'm very, very proud to be an urban planner. I have over 10 years experience, specifically in transportation planning. But most importantly, I founded an organization known as Wow Mom Kenya. I'm the founder and CEO. An organization that was founded on the fact that I felt that the cities are not working for me as a mother and as a woman and as a caregiver. And I'm so excited to keep sharing the experience around that later on. So excited to meet the panel and looking forward to a fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for introducing yourselves. We have a really amazing experience and expertise with us. So we'll get started with the first question. So Angela, I'll start with you. In your context, what does gender responsive planning look like in practice? And where do you see the biggest gap between what global frameworks like the New Urban Agenda and the SDGs commit to and what actually happens on the ground?
Absolutely. So, for me, Gender responsive planning, in really my context, really means asking a foundational question before making any policy decision. And it's who actually lives in the neighborhoods, how do they move through the city, and what makes them feel safe or unsafe. Here in Philadelphia, that means designing housing programs that account for the reality that women, particularly women of color, are disproportionately cost burdened, more likely to be single heads of households, and more likely to be displaced by the market pressures we're starting to see. I lead the mayor's home initiative, which is a $2 billion 4-year commitment to create and preserve 30,000 housing units. And at its core, a gender equity strategy. And even more so, we don't always name it that way for a variety of other reasons here in this country at this moment. The gap between some of the new urban agenda on one hand and what actually happens on the ground on the other is really a gap of implementation infrastructure. The global frameworks are aspirational, and they're right. But like Goal 11, for instance, talks about safe, inclusive cities, and it talks about gender responsive urban planning, but those commitments don't actually translate into disaggregated data on the local level. So we women specifically. So what I see most often is gender gets added as a lens in the planning document and then evaporates when we do the capital improvement process or even the zoning code. And the work has to really go all the way down to the regulatory and the fiscal instruments, not just the vision statement. And I think Panina mentioned it a lot. I don't have children, but I am a caregiver for my father. And when I think about bringing my dad to live in Philadelphia, it would be almost impossible. Aside from my lack of work-life balance, we don't have a lot of first floor bedrooms. And so when my dad comes to visit me, I have to have a caregiver to stay home with him to make sure he can go up and down the stairs to even use a restroom. And we're a row house city. So even how we're designing, we don't design housing for aging in place, which impacts women, unfortunately, a lot more than others, because traditionally, and it's not always the case, we tend to be the one that takes the responsibility. And a lot of us are in that sandwich generation where we're raising our kids and raising our parents. And so it makes it really hard when we're not designing for multi-generational housing. We've gotten away from it. So that's my long and short answer of that. But it's one of my pain points because I'm dealing with this real time. And I can't imagine, if I had kids to add on top of that, I'd probably be more gray hair.
Yeah, really interesting, really great points. I think that the lack of implementation and kind of consideration of gender in like a tangible way is definitely a common trend globally, I would say, from my research. Aisha, or Isha, I hopefully I'm saying your name right.
It's Aisha. Right.
Okay, just checking. I'll put the same question over to you. So in your context, what does gender responsive planning look like in practice?
So for me, at the central level, we have what you call national planning taking place at the Ministry of Planning, the Town and Country Planning Division. And from a Caribbean perspective, especially our role as planners is to ensure that the needs of women and their experience in lived spaces are met and balanced with competing economic, social, and environmental, and even political needs. I want to say that it's from an inclusive planning perspective. So we have to follow our laws, our policies, our strategies. We have what is called the National Spatial Development Strategy. And we have our acts. It's like a Town and Country Planning Act. We have a new one, Planning and Facilitation of Development Act, which is the amended one. Because we follow the British system, our planning laws are a bit outdated. So we have new legislation, but it's not fully proclaimed. I want to say that we actually are trying to do inclusive planning. And this is where, the role of planning is important. However, when you look at those documents that we are guided by, not one of them even has the word gender included. So our development strategy does not include the word gender. All right. Also, I would just want to quickly mention that when it comes to the data, Ms. Brooks mentioned the disaggregation of data. Sex data is just simply, is it male, is it female? But is this data analyzed to actually not have what we are calling gender washing or what we consider meaningful or inclusive gender participation? Our last census was in 2011. We are now in 2026. So the data even that we are forced to use to create what we call local area plans, it's outdated, and therefore we cannot account for vulnerable groups, especially women. They are affected. So for instance, this is Trinidad. We have a migration crisis, immigrant crisis with the neighbor in Venezuela. There are a number of undocumented migrants in Trinidad. How do we therefore plan for persons like that? Right? So gender responsive planning has to include all these things. So I'm just giving you like one example per se, but it goes on and on. Another major aspect for my work is really development control. This involves requiring developers to meet standards related to safety, accessibility, and essential services. Regulatory decisions play a key role in shaping community structure, ensuring the developments include appropriate green spaces, for instance, and a mix of densities. All right, so we are trying to incorporate more gender inclusive planning in our spatial planning guidelines and our standards. So this is just some of it. I can't go into too much because it's so much, but definitely we are looking at, and you'll see later on in another question, how we will try to gender mainstream. So thank you.
Asia. Yeah, I think we're definitely going to get to some more specific examples, but it's really helpful for kind of an overview of all the work that you do. Penina, I can move on to question 2, but if you prefer to, you can cover 1 as well if you'd like, depending on if it's more applicable to your context. But yeah, if you have a specific example of gender equity in planning, otherwise, an example of gender responsive planning in practice is also good.
Okay, so do you want me to go for question 2 and then I can combine them together?
Yeah, definitely. I just wasn't sure based on your experience if you prefer one of them, but whatever works.
All right. So in my context, and this is in the case of Nairobi, Kenya, specifically, is whereby you find that women are not included in planning and designing of cities. So first of all, the planning system is very patriarchal. So we have fewer women planners compared to men. So it starts there. So they're not able to integrate or to have the lens of women sometimes. And so giving my case example, one time I was designing a bus park in one of the secondary towns in Kenya. And at the time, I remember just trying to think about how women commute with their children. And we're talking about long distance commute from around 200 kilometers away from one city to the other. And at the time, I also wanted to experience it at a personal level with my child. And I get into Nairobi CBD with my 1-year-old, and she soiled her diapers, and I needed a place to change her. And I'm thinking, oh, this city, besides just the transport system that has not given me priority seating and, just any sort of consideration for me to board a regular public transport, it is not even thinking about how I would, in dignity, access a toilet that is inclusive, including that has a provision of a baby changing station. And for me, that was another eye-opening, because I was like, if mothers are not able to access a baby changing station, does that exclude how they access spaces and the public spaces that you're designing in the city with their children? And actually what we decided to do is that we conducted a research. And the research we wanted to find out that whether does lack of baby changing station affect the way you access spaces with the children. And we found out that 84% of caregivers avoid traveling with their children because they cannot access a baby changing station. I do remember walking into Nairobi City County Government trying to understand how comes you have public toilets, at least in the city, in the CBD, but how comes you do not have such a small integration? To our shock, they did not even have an idea how baby changing stations look like. Yes, they acknowledge it's a gap, but they have no idea. And going back to my Nyeri case, the other town that I was designing a bus park for, I remember now presenting to them the designs and informing them, you know what, let's make sure that the bus park is inclusive. It also provides for the mothers and the children, specifically to just have a baby changing station. And I do remember the leaders asking me, how big is that baby changing station? How much procurement process does it require? And that's a very small integration. And going back to even to the planning systems, whereby the moment now we came up with our own baby changing station, there was also the issue of, sorry, my camera just went off, but I hope I can continue. There was the issue of me being requested to sort of do a development application. And I'm wondering, this is something, it's just a facility, a retrofit within a toilet. I'm not doing a construction. So what does that mean? That there is a lot of ignorance, if I can call it that way. There's so much unaware. There's a lot of misinformation regarding the needs of women and children in particular that make cities continue being exclusive. So that's in my context. And what you're trying to do with WOMAM is not to voice that, conduct research, do some of the implementation, and see how the cities can become more inclusive and more gender responsive.
Great. Thank you, Penina. Yeah, that's such a great point. I think Charlotte co-wrote a really great a journal article that talks about how the work on gender inclusion tends to solely focus on like safety, because we don't always understand the breadth of women and gender inclusive individuals' experience in the city. So I think you touched some amazing points about thinking about baby changing stations and how they impact how women move around the city. So we'll move on to the second question, but I think it can probably be combined a little with the third one. Aisha, so if you can share a specific example from your work where you've worked to promote gender equity in planning, and what made it effective and what were the hardest obstacles to overcome.
Okay, thank you for that question. So really and truly, I would look at the plans that we would have tried to prepare when I was at local government. It was a program that was funded by the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. I don't know if anyone has ever heard of the CARI-led program, which was Caribbean Local Economic Development. So basically what they tried to do was have local economic development and planning at the local authorities, because we are moving towards decentralized planning. That program was like pilot programs across the Caribbean. So in my country, we went ahead and prepared what we call strategic local economic development plans for each of the 14 municipalities that we actually have here. So in preparing the strategic-led plans, we had to ensure that we use the CARI-led toolkit for gender, which was to make sure that we created local area profiles that would have gender information disaggregated to be able to inform the eventual action plans. So alongside the plans, we would have worked with each municipality to create what CARI-led would have called led planning advisory committees. So in these planning advisory committees, that was a space for women to actually get a chance to join these committees and lobby for action items that would help them create spaces, help them to earn an income because it's economic based. So they would be able to come up with things like what we call in Trinidad pop-up shops. So their local talents would be on showcase where maybe they created food products and they'd be able to sell. But this was funded partly by the Canadian government and partly by us. So the Canadian government gave us the know-how, how to do this. And then we would have because I would have been at the central local authority, we would have put in a line item in our public sector investment program to help facilitate that. We would have been the one. So I was particularly the one that sat on like committees to hire officers at the municipalities, to hire the lead pack officers, etc., and to make sure that the plans were prepared that included gender. It was a challenge because after the Canadian government, after their funding was, complete, their pilots, the challenge would have been to keep funding allocated towards these projects. So funding would have been an issue that would, help that equality and to ensure that gender equity would come into play. I do have a quick project that I want to share from Belize City. They too would have benefited from the CARI-led project. Now they have a project called the BRIS Assessment, BRISS, assessment in Belize City, which is a gender-informed planning meant recognizing that urban systems, infrastructure, and disaster management do not affect everyone equally. So that they would have gone ahead and collated data to help them with their planning and disaster risk reduction systems, which would shape their structural conditions that influence women's lives, right? And they would have looked at their public spaces and used SMART principles. Now, gender-based violence is also something that is a major concern in both Belize and in Trinidad. And in Trinidad, I find, and this is where the gender washing comes in, I find that we tend to focus on gender-based violence a lot. And we don't really focus on like the planning systems that could improve certain things like women's access to safety, to housing, and all those things. So those are just two small examples. I will not go on and on. So thank you for that opportunity to share.
I think we're interested for you to go on and on, but we unfortunately don't have enough time. So thank you for sharing those examples. I think they're really great to hear about, especially with the connection to kind of women's economic empowerment. I know there's examples of the care blocks in Bogota, which sounds kind of similar, having that sort of social enterprise connection. And then thinking about sort of climate change and risk and how women and children are disproportionately impacted by climate change. So definitely important connections there. So Angela, um, I'd like to ask you the second question, but I think similarly, there could be an overlap in terms of thinking about a specific example and then how women are treated as beneficiaries of planning decisions. So if you'd like to pick between two or three, but if you want to share a specific example, I know you shared the one about caregiving and your father, which was really great, but yeah, thank you.
Yes. And I also dropped in a chat an example from Danville, Virginia. The American Planning Association recently did an article on a primarily comprehensive plan process led by women in Danville and how they really took that into consideration for everybody to read when they get a chance. But I think I'll pick number three. And both women are often treated as beneficiaries rather than agents, mostly because that resonates with me most personally. The framing of women as beneficiaries, people planning happens to rather than people planning happens with, as opposed to for. It's really kind of baked into like the institutional DNA of most planning departments. And it shows up when we hold meetings, how we write notices, what languages we use, what childcare and transportation accommodations we make, or in most cases we don't make, the times of our meetings. I sat on the Chicago Zoning Board of Appeals for many moons, and I remember at a hearing that was going on 6 hours, a woman acknowledged that she had a level of privilege because she had a nanny and she could call in the nanny to get her to stay so she could have time to testify. But that is a luxury that many women just simply do not have. And the meeting started at 9 a.m. for the record, so it was now 6:30 p.m. So, we don't take into those types of conversations. And so we've got to really think about, what meaningful participation looks like and how we meet people where they are literally. So the Danville plan I referenced earlier is a comprehensive plan update, and it's a powerful example of predominantly women-led team that recognized that working mothers had consistently been left out via prior research. So they held meetings early in the morning and after school and connected directly with school groups and parent networks. They used kitchen table talks as a design principle, because if you think about when we typically gather, you can have a party wherever you want, but we always end up in the kitchen. And so if a planning concept couldn't be explained clearly in a casual kitchen conversation, it really needed to be rethought. And so that's not a really soft kind of thought process. It's really about being intentional in our design. So here in Philadelphia, we've had to be honest that our traditional public meeting formats aren't working. Tuesday nights in a municipal building systemically exclude working women, mothers, and caregivers. So changing that requires really structural investment. We've got to start thinking about how do we have it where we can accommodate childcare or at least children attending the meeting. So having them at libraries or sometimes having them at park district buildings where there are things for children to do, have flexible formats, digital access. We still here in the States have a lot of very in-person meeting formats when we could be doing hybrid very easily. COVID taught us that. It really requires being honest when we look in rooms and see who's missing and they don't reflect the people that are most affected by the decision, being flexible to think about how do we get them in the room. And that's something I'm very passionate about because I'm in a majority minority city at this moment, but I'm originally from Seattle, Washington, which is not. And there's no land use decision in the United States that impacts communities of color more than any. I mean, it's just planning decisions impact those communities the most, and we tend not to be in the room. So we've got to be more intentional about ensuring that that happens, and we are flexible on how to make sure that does happen.
Amazing. Thank you. A topic I'm very passionate about because my PhD is looking at consultation and engagement for planning and to what extent it's gender inclusive or isn't. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. It sounds like some really amazing initiatives that you have in Philadelphia on that. Can I ask, just a follow-up question, I guess, do you have, sorry if you already alluded to this, is there like a gender lead with the city, or is it just kind of embedded across different departments and such?
That's probably giving us more credit than where we deserve yet, but we do have I don't know what the name of it is, because we have somatic changes going on with language due to federal stuff, but we have a DEI office that kind of centers all of that. So we just got a new director, and under that, they do have a focus. Like we've got a women's commission, so they do a lot, and they split out different departments within the women's commission. And under that, they've got an LGBT officer as well. So we've got all of those things that we're trying to take in consideration. We have a long way to go, but that office is really spearheading that and trying to make it kind of a global thing through all departments and not have it sit with one department that's doing really well, which tends to happen often. So making sure we come up with a citywide strategy, but we're not quite there yet, but we're getting there.
Yeah, that's really great to know. I think like hearing about the examples, even if they're not like the perfect or the full solution yet, is really important, I think.
It
Okay.
also helps when we have a mayor that has a child that's in middle school. So, it impacts our mayor. So,
Oh, yeah,
who
for
is
sure.
also a single mother. So,
That lived experience is really important. Hey. So Penina, over to you again. So question 3. So women are often treated as beneficiaries of planning decisions rather than active agents. How do we change that, and what does meaningful participation actually look like?
Thank you so much for that question. And it reflects the same in Nairobi, whereby, yes, we are treated as beneficiaries, but it's because, just like Angela alluded, is the fact that women have lots of responsibilities, specifically caregiving responsibilities, and their schedules do not align with the planning meetings, right? So you realize that women are left out in any tables when it comes to decision making. And the other thing is that because of economic downtown, since COVID and a lot of women lost jobs, they turned out to informal economy because, you can go into a market and buy a bag of mangoes and start selling right there. And because of being in the informal sector, and they are sort of living hand to mouth, they barely have any time that they can commit to any other engagement other than their businesses. So we recently conducted a study recently in the market centers and in Nairobi, and we wanted to understand when was the last time as a woman you attended a training, a regular training, or participated in any planning decision or leadership forum? And surprisingly, 93% of women had not been engaged in any of such an activity. 93% is such a high number. And if you think even what you're doing here, this is learning. This is a learning platform and you're here to learn. But not for women who are the majority. We're talking in Nairobi, specifically 80% of the vendors are women, and those are the backbone of the economy. So majority of the women are in the market. So if the majority is not included in those decision making, what are we doing as a country? So what WAMAM has been trying to do is that we go down to their level. We understand what are your barriers, childcare being one of them. What we do is that we provide on-site childcare facilities in partnership with government. That way now the childcare burden is taken away from the women and they're able to participate. So while we may not necessarily all the time do lots of planning work, we're also doing sort of financial literacy. And we've realized that we have over 95% participation in every class, and women sit in and listen. Why? Because the burdens that they had have been taken away. Right. And so they see value in, then what we also do is that understanding, going down to their level and understanding why is it that you're not enrolling for leadership forum. We also came to understand that most of them are not even educated. So when you go to planning meeting and you're using a very technical planning terms like land use planning, they may not be able to understand. But if you go down to a level of understanding, it's how you place a nursery school and a shopping center, just trying to understand how they journey to access different services. So just trying to come up with systems or addressing them in a language that they understand is also the other thing. So what we've been trying to do as well, Mom, is at least as we do the financial literacy training, we've realized that if you come down to their level, if you can align with their schedules, discuss with them what is your least busy time and have the sessions during that time instead of just imposing, okay, it's every Friday at 10 p.m. Understand this is like, I will give you an example of one market. Gikomba market is one of the biggest markets in the city. And in our opinion, and because of even the donors requirement, you were supposed to complete a training by December. but we could not do it. Why? The women were technically not available because December is their busiest season. So if you disrupt them, if you're trying to impose that, you know what, come participate for this particular training at this particular time, be it even a planning meeting, the women will not show up. But then if you understand their schedule, if you go down to their level, understand their schedule, understand, like Angela talked about the kitchen tables, where do they meet? Is it in church? And then just make that happen. It's us going down to the levels of the community and listening to them in a language that they understand. That way they feel free and they feel valued. And I'm telling you, they give such brilliant opinion. We are currently undertaking a study on mobility of care, whereby we are trying to understand how they access the daycare centers, like, as they commute into the market, how are they able to access the daycare? Because how the markets were designed, again, they did not have children in mind. They were designed for vendors and shoppers, mostly men. But who do we have in the markets? Majority being the women, and women with children who are commuting to work with them every day. So what we're trying to do is that understand how does lack of a footpath or a safe crossing around the market affect how often you come with your baby or with your child? And does that also affect your uptake? So it's basically implementing systems, urban systems and services to meet the need of the people and meeting them to their need. That's what I would say. Thank you.
Amazing. Definitely a lot of connections to what Angela said there about like meeting people where they are. I really like the kitchen tables too, but it sounds like you're doing some amazing research projects there as well. Definitely having worked in the public sector in Canada for many years, changing to kind of having language that's more accessible to people so they understand what is happening. I think sometimes not even the planners understand what's going on. Penina, did you have another point? I think you raised your hand.
Yeah, there's something
Okay.
I forgot to mention, and I
Yeah,
think
no
this
worries.
is incredible.
Yeah.
Once because we work a lot with government as well, Mommy, we are in partnership with government. So we are the ear on the ground. We understand what the women need. And so all this evidence that we collect, we give it back to the county government and they use it for policy development. So we've seen a lot of our work influence how policies have been made. For instance, right now in the County Integrated Development Plan for 2022 to 2027, they're able to incorporate baby changing stations, which was not there before. Because of our work in the market centers where we implement daycare facilities, now it's a part of the gender and gender sectoral plan 2024 to 2034. So our work is very important in building evidence to shape how government works and develop policy. And most recently, we also now worked together with the government to bring in sectors together, specifically to mainstream care. It is more care on care work, but it's a platform to bring in the people who have been excluded, and we understand how care is very most of the burden is shouldered by women. So that has again expanded the scope as to how government is planning and budgeting for care. And hopefully in the coming year, they're going to put in more budget, more allocations that could see women's needs be articulated in the next financial year. So I wanted to just talk about that also.
Yeah,
Thank
that's
you.
amazing. That's incredible. I think it's so good to see kind of the tangible results and also the connection between like the grassroots efforts to government policy changing and then budget being more allocated to it. I think that's critical. Aisha, if we could also ask you question 3, and then we'll move on to the final question and then questions from participants, if that's cool. So I already read it, but women are often treated as beneficiaries. So how can they be active agents instead?
Well, I would say I kind of alluded to it in question 2, but really and truly following from Penina, we need to have grassroots groups and we need to have their involvement. It starts at the local level. So in my work, we do participatory planning. So if we have to do any plan, we would go out there and we would, have this consultation. But it needs to be more meaningful, and we need to help women organize themselves into groups that have a stronger lobbying voice, because we do have a lot of groups, but it's how do we help them to be more effective? So I think that is the role of us as government, to be able to go out there and let the local authorities sort of mobilize them. So I would have mentioned that with the lead officers, but it also supposed to happen at the planning level as well. All right. When it comes to some of the non-governmental groups, we were supposed to have Habitat for Humanity here. They also look at developing tools for housing and shelter, but they try to take it from a gender perspective. Um, they have what they call a PASA tool. It's to help with disaster risk reduction. And maybe at another session, we did agree that we might have them later on to give a better understanding of what their work entails. But generally, we need to have the local women groups, even when we're planning for communities and design and so on. This is an example of what my work really entails. And from the level of combining policy and governance analysis, we need to have that taking place a little more. So that would be my contribution to question 3.
Yeah, amazing. And definitely similar connections to the other two speakers too, in that kind of
Yes.
leveraging the existing work that's going on and collaborating across sectors rather than working in silos. Hey.
Correct.
Okay, so we'll move on to the final question. We've had such great answers from all of you. I've written many, many pages of notes. I'm very excited. We'll start with Penina this time. So looking ahead, what is the one change, whether in policy, practice, or culture, that would make the biggest difference to women's rights, safety, and participation in the cities and communities that you work in?
That's an incredible question. Thank you so much for asking. I think just like we just talked about in question 3 is going down to the level of the woman, the basic woman in the city. Not just we who sit in offices, but a regular woman, and find out what their needs are and articulate their needs. It's that simple. Understand how they move, what they, why the why do they, what kind of services do they need, where, with who do they get them with? I don't know if I'm using the correct English, but where do they access the services, of what quality? And most importantly, ensure that we make sure that the services provided to them are in dignity and, most importantly, affordable. Sometimes we realize that we are providing services, but they are away from reach from the regular women because of affordability. So we need to understand that as we plan these systems, as we provide the services with government, as we make policies, we are coming up with programs that meet the needs of the regular people. And the only way to do that is engage with them at grassroots level, provide the platform that, just don't call it community participation to rubber stamp a planning process, but rather make it a deliberate effort to listen to them in different avenues, not just diversify the platforms, not just one meeting at a social hall and then you think that, oh, the community accepted this particular plan, but rather diversify the different avenues that women can engage and air their views. We can also leverage on technology where women can give more views. And most importantly, even at the decision level, I came to realize that even as we continue advancing this work, it takes a lot of effort to pitch to men to understand some of these planning needs. So let's also be very deliberate. Like in Kenya, we have what we call the gender rule, where we ensure that in every government, whether national, the parliament, the county levels, that we have at least a third of either gender, whether men or women. And it's not particularly important or not important, but rather implemented. But I think we need to be more intentional in having more women in the planning department. Let's have more women in the leadership position, so that at least when the grassroots women bring in the issues, we have women overseeing the implementation, and budget is also allocated. It's something else that we've also realized, that women, even if they're in government, just because they're put there because they're nice to have, their ministries again are not given lots of budget compared to the men. So let's work with let's listen to the women in the grassroots, but also let's have women in positions of power that they can be able to influence decisions that favor women. And most finally, let's ensure dignity and affordability in provision of the services. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you. Yeah, we definitely need all those things. And I think everything you said was important, but I think just not doing participation or community as like a checkbox exercise and it actually being meaningful definitely stood out to me. We'll go to Aisha next, and then Angela will have you as the conclusion. Thanks.
Right. So I specifically want to talk about gender mainstreaming. And to do that, I feel like we need to have a gendered lens to our planning strategies. And this starts with the data collection and to inform evidence-based decisions of disaggregated data sets. So not just having the data sets disaggregated, but it has to have a gendered lens to it. We want to also have that data, and when we get the data, we have to have sensitization campaigns about the different things that we are doing for vulnerable groups, especially women and girls. So for instance, when we have grant funding programs, a lot of them don't know about it. There are other things that we could do to safeguard communities. If we look at the Jamaica case study, and this is something that the data also is going to help us with in the future. I recently sat on a panel and I met an insurance agent who was also on the panel. And what she mentioned is that Jamaica was able to offset the Hurricane Melissa effects because they had a 91 point something million US or something like that, the exact figure for victims of Hurricane Melissa to be able to access in their rehabilitation and the effects of the hurricane. Similarly, for all these Caribbean islands, because it's small island developing states, we need to get the data to show where flood incidents might happen, climate changes are happening. So if we can have the data, I think that is the first step, this aggregated in with a gendered lens to be able to now mainstream gender into our policy making. That is the first step to gender equality, right? And I mean, there are many examples where people could have benefited from things, but we didn't have the data, as I mentioned before. We haven't had an updated census since 2011. Yes, we do have household surveys, but we need to have more updated data. We need to manipulate the data and ask questions in a particular way to be able to capture data differently. So the gender analysis could be more informed, more inclusive, and that is how we would achieve gender equality. Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, I think the data or data, depending on who's saying it, is so vital. And I think a lot of the time it's crazy that there it hasn't been a census for sorry, someone just joined us.
Over 10 years.
Yeah. And I know a lot of the time that's coming from like a place of privilege, obviously, like there isn't capacity or funding and stuff, right? But I guess it's what that impacts in terms of what decisions are made. It's such a vital thing. So that's a really great point. Angela, if you could answer the
Yes.
final question, thank you.
I think they both took everything I was going to say, but I would just really hone in on the data comment and just that also needs to be tied to budget accountability. I mean, everything we want, gender responsive design, meaningful participation, equitable home ownership pathways require us to be able to really measure whether women are actually being reached and whether outcomes are actually changing for them. And so right now, most local planning and housing systems here in the States don't routinely collect that type of data and or publish it or act on the disaggregated data by gender, race, or income all together in one spot. And so we're making policy in the aggregate, and then we act surprised when that aggregate improvements they really just mask persistent disparities we've been seeing for decades since the founding of this country, honestly. So we've really got to think about every housing program, every transit investment, all the community engagement efforts, if they had to report on who was reached and who had benefited, and if those reports were tied to continued funding, I think the culture would shift because the incentive structure would shift, and data without accountability really is wallpaper. And so data with accountability needs to be the policy that we move forward with. So I think that's kind of the change I'd make if I were thinking about policy decisions that would really move the needle for women and girls.
Amazing. Thank you. That I feel like you had some quotes that need to be on like t-shirts or like laminated more than t-shirts. Data is without accountability is wallpaper. That's an amazing one. Thank you so much. That was a great conclusion. Yeah, so that's the main discussion questions. Charlotte, do we have any questions in the chat at all?
We do have 3 questions, or 4 questions in the Q&A.
Okay.
Do you want me to read them out for you, Jenna?
I can grab them. Who was first?
I think they're in order on the screen.
Yeah. Okay, so Vidya, I hope I'm saying your name correctly. I would love to hear the panelists share a specific instance, interaction, or small win from their recent memory that fueled their work and gave them the most hope for the future. Oh, that's a lovely question. Thank you. Did everyone hear that? I can repeat. Okay.
Yes, we did.
Yeah, Aisha, do you want to go first?
Sure. So recently we had what we were calling a local area planning process, and we were able to meet with all the stakeholders. From a gendered perspective, we need to get the technical agencies to work with us as we prepare the plan. So that, for instance, a lot of people got up and this was professionals. This is not the community as yet. So before we go to the community, we dealt with the stakeholders, and I found that it was successful in that we were all able to share. Even people were saying that, there are vulnerable women in the community. And somebody was saying that there are a lot of flooding incidents, but fortunately, the flooding incidents in our study area didn't take place in the last 5 years. So for me, the win is really getting all these agencies together to be able to verify what persons are saying. When we go to the community, if the community and the women say that they are affected by flooding, we'll be able to go back to these agencies. So for me, the small win is really collaboration with other agencies, technical agencies, so that when we do write our local area plan, it will consider the needs and things that affect these women, and we'll be able to make recommendations to address it. So that's a small win for me.
Amazing. I think it's a small win, but it seems like a big win, hey? Panina, can you go next?
Thank you so much. I think I've had so many wins recently, but it's because it's culmination of years of advocacy and working closely with government. So last week, I remember getting a call from a senior leader in government, Nairobi County, and they wanted us to scale one of our programs to another market center. Why is because they had listened, they had seen the issues that are affecting women and children in another market. Allow me not to disclose the name at the moment, but it's also one of the biggest markets in Nairobi City. And them just calling us, let's explore on how we can scale the programs to that city. Initially, it used to be us really begging, can we do this? But now when it's the other side of government calling us and let's do this, for me, that's a big win because they seems to have listened to the issues of the women, and also where we might implement that particular facilities in the social hall, whereby already, because the market is already very built up and almost occupied, but there are social halls. So seeing how the different departments are coming together to share space in a way that it's sustainable, that just because it's like a model that brings every department together, that they're able to talk to each other and share spaces that meet the need of the people. And for me, that is planning. And I'm really excited that we are having that right now. So yeah, thank you.
Amazing. Yeah, definitely. And as you said, it's I guess it's a small win, but it's come with so many years and years of work that you've done and led, and that's incredible. And yeah, I think in planning, we tend to just talk about planning as this kind of singular thing sometimes, but it's such a systems change and connection to all the different like city and government departments and everything. So you're showing that and how important it is. Angela, if you could answer the question too.
Yeah, I think mine is probably a little off the beaten path in that my biggest concern for the profession of planning is the next generation of planners and where we're heading. And so I think my small win is I just met with a couple of women actually, students at University of Pennsylvania's graduate program about the work that I do in terms of housing. And it just gave me so much hope for the future, for our field and our profession, to see these young minds who get it in a way that I definitely didn't do. I didn't at that age for sure, and that level of experience and kind of the pathways and the questions they were asking me and their pushback on the types of things that are really equity focused, particularly in a city like Philadelphia that's seen so much disinvestment in Black and Brown communities that are overwhelmingly women. asking the questions and coming up with real solutions. They had a project, they were asking me questions, and some of their solutions are things we could really be doing. And so it gave me faith that we're moving in the right direction and all is not lost. Because sometimes when we think about, I guess they're Gen Z, it seems, people get really negative, and it gave me very big hope for that.
Amazing. Yeah, that's incredible to hear the next generation focus as well. I think having worked in academia and taught a couple of classes, I think some of the questions I get asked are always incredible. Sometimes I don't know the answers, but they're
Also
always
true.
yeah, they're always very important and kind of show what's to come, which is something to be optimistic about. Charlotte, I know you have to do reflection. Should we do one more question, or what do you think time-wise?
Yeah, I think you've got time for more
Maybe
than
two.
one. Yeah.
Okay.
Um,
Um, yeah, so the next
I
one,
really liked the next question.
sorry, for some
yeah,
reason it scooched out of order
Oh,
for me
yeah.
all of a sudden.
it's how can we ensure women's needs, especially in terms
Oh,
of planning
yeah,
not
okay, sorry, because the other one was answered. My apologies.
yeah.
Okay, so the next one is how can we ensure women's needs, especially in terms of planning, are not reduced to childcare, but also include economic autonomy and personal well-being? Angela, did you want to speak to that one first?
I don't know that I have an answer, but I just like the question because as a childless spinster, as they would say in this country, I think about that a lot because I'm in my 50s. I don't have children. So I certainly feel like sometimes when we have these conversations about women, there isn't really room for people like me. So I appreciate the question. But I do think thinking about the economic ability for women to provide for themselves, particularly in cities like Philadelphia, where they are overwhelmingly single led households, has to be a part of our planning infrastructure. And we don't always think about the economic development tie in to our planning work. And so we have to be thinking about things like, okay, where are the jobs that people are taking? And, I ride public transportation, but I won't do it after 6 p.m. So somebody who's working a 3 to 11 shift, is it safe for a woman? And we don't always take those considerations into the types of things we do. And that is absolutely tied to not only just personal well-being, but economic security. Because if I can't safely get to and from where I need to go using public transit, particularly if I'm lower income, is a huge concern. And it's not a focal point that we take in consideration often.
Yeah, yeah, that's really great point. I'm also a single spinster, so really appreciate that title. Actually, Angela, while we're talking, there's another question that because you're in the US, I think we'll only refer to you, so we may as well kind of get into that quickly. Just wondering what terms are being used to reference women in planning documents given the anti diversity, equity, inclusion federal policies.
We're still figuring it out here in Philadelphia, like our minority or our DEI office is now the small and local office. So we're using that terminology because that generally does encompass minority and women-owned businesses. So that's kind of the focal point, but we're still, it's still in court in a lot of cities. Some cities haven't changed at all. So stay tuned over the next few months because the federal administration is starting to cut funding if things aren't happening fast enough. So people are going to have to make those decisions soon. But so far, we haven't had anything. So we're just going with the small and local focus. And we will still measure who we're doing business with by all of those things. We just can't give points or special consideration.
Yeah, that's really good to know. I think it's hard to know, especially when we're in the UK about what's going on with that. Not everyone is, just to clarify, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. Aisha, if you want, you can speak to that previous question about kind of thinking beyond like childcare and women's safety and
Yes,
such. But
I
there's
actually had the answer prepared here.
okay. That's
So we
totally
were
fine. Yeah.
saying that we could talk about the local area plans and allocating spaces for women in these local area plans
Mhm.
and supporting those areas through supporting businesses by allocating like zones for mixed use economic development, as well as having to just explain that having both the residential and the commercial uses exist in one space, what we call comprehensive planning that would be able to help women. We're not just focusing on childcare, but we're focusing on economic development as well and being able to for them to access their jobs because it's closer to home, and that will also work with transportation. So that one of the agencies that we met with in the recent planning exercises was the public transportation system. So they will come in and help us ensure that they have an active public transport service within the communities that we're preparing for. And we would work with people like the Highways Division, the Ministry of Works, to ensure the road network could cater for these houses, and where we put the houses, where we put the commerce. So we are really actually the ones who determine what land uses go where. And this is where we can actually have an influence over making sure that women's economic activities are at the forefront of our plans.
Great.
All right.
That's a wonderful answer. Yeah, I think thinking about like the bigger picture and infrastructure, and not just sort of like, I think a lot of the time there's a lot of really great work about like women and girls kind of in parks in the UK, for example. And it's wonderful to engage with women, but I think we also need to think about the infrastructure that connects them to the broader city and everything like that. Penina, there's a couple of questions. I'm happy if you want to answer the one kind of thinking beyond childcare. There's also one a bit more planning terminology in the question that's talking about dual land systems. It's a bit more technical, but basically, what are the biggest barriers to institutionalizing gender responsive planning, and how have you seen them successfully addressed in practice? I think you alluded to that a little bit in terms of the government kind of specifically taking on the work that you've done. But if you want to kind of speak to either of those questions, if that's not too confusing.
Thank you so much. I wanted to say, at least allow me to mention the other one, because I'm deep into
definitely.
childcare. I agree that childcare is not the only women issue. It's not the only need. However, in the African context, specifically Kenya, is that we realize that childcare is a burden to women economic agency. So without addressing childcare, then women are not able to access economic activities, the jobs, the market, and all that. In fact, from our research is that childcare burden reduces their economic agency by 53%. So all the time they take, looking for their children in the market alongside selling their wares, it reduces their profitability. So they continuously remain marginalized economically. So for me, I think it's important, not just about childcare, but care is integral, understanding all the household responsibility that women have to do besides the job opportunities that they have to do, and trying to see how you can come up with either accessible services, like public transport is one of them, again, that women can be able to access jobs faster and in an affordable way. But going back to the systems, one of the things that I've seen is that for sure women, especially in the pastoral communities in Kenya, women do not even own land, so they're not able to control resources. So again, that affects how the decision-making aspect. So in as much as you're calling me for a planning forum, and I do not even own the land that you're talking about, I do not have decision-making power. So it does not hold much water. So what we do in Kenya is mostly doing a lot of advocacy. While the law says that land can be, a father can inherit the daughter, which was somehow the cultural norms are more ingrained, and communities seems to follow that more. So what you're doing is lots of advocacy, and we are trying to see how we've slowly seeing communities change bit by bit. But yeah, it's more of a social issue because things are there in law, but socially it's still a problem. So I hope that helps in some form, and that's it on my end.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. That was a really great answer, and sorry for making you answer two questions. But yeah, I think that the point that it's not just childcare, because childcare and caregiving is so much related to the broader economy and society, I think is a really important one there. Should I do another one, Charlotte, or do you want to wrap it up?
We're on 6 p.m.
Okay.
If the panelists are able to do one more question then reflections, that's fine, but I'm conscious of people's time. And I know we're at 6 p.m. in the UK, but other people are in the middle of their day. Yeah. Are people able to continue to do Hola Sola's question? Got a couple of thumbs up that people were quite keen it was answered.
Okay, yeah, so we'll do that one and then you can do your reflections. Okay, so the final question is, can the panelists share what has changed or is changing in regards to planning policy and legislation? Has there been any shift at all, particularly in the patriarchal society? I cannot recollect, for example, where market women were involved in the planning and design of market spaces. As a result of as a result, the open markets, particularly in the African context, lack form, functionality, and infrastructures to support women's needs. Um, so obviously that relates specifically to something Penina said. But as you just answered that question, Aisha, do you want to go first in terms of what has changed with planning policy and legislation and the connection to the patriarchal society?
Yes, well, I think that traditionally we are patriarchal in the Caribbean setting, but I think that there is more advocacy for women's rights. And you see, for instance, the programs and policies that the government are putting out there, you see that it does target vulnerable groups. It does have some sort of allowance for vulnerable persons, but you still have a level of criteria that you need to meet. So I remember when I was getting my home, I too had to go to the Housing Development Corporation. But because I was a single mom, I would have gotten priority and eventually I got my home. So I am seeing where they're trying to do more for women. But I think that at this point, and especially the job that I have now, we can do a lot more for planning legislation and the trickle down of well, this is what you call the implementation of the legislation. Eventually, we can create policies and strategies and what we call standard operating procedures that would take into account the needs of women and girls and create, like, for instance, if we're doing standards, so for instance, smaller lots, when the government has smaller lots to work with, so the Housing Development Corporation would use less space, but this would be able to make it more affordable for women. These are the kinds of policies that we are as a planning agency and a planning system. We're trying to look at those things to see how the standards could accommodate eventual fiscal policy that would target groups like women and girls. So even in the design of these communities, so we are creating comprehensive development plans, which would take into consideration the open space, where we put the housing, the access to transportation. So I think we are getting there, and I would call it gender mainstreaming eventually. I would put some emphasis into the work because I think now we understand what it takes to actually materialize this gender equality, but we are far from that because we have to streamline our data. We have to ensure that we use the data to analyze what we want to achieve in our plans. But this is the right place for it as in a planning system. So
Definitely. Yeah, thank you for sharing. And I know I saw that we have people that are attending this webinar that have been writing about gender mainstreaming for decades upon decades. So I'm sure it's lovely for them to hear that it's happening to various extents across the globe. Angela, if we can ask you the same question next, if that's okay.
Can I go last? Because I just got distracted.
Yeah, no, it's all good. Do you want me to
Answer.
repeat it? So
Yeah,
it's
that would be perfect.
yeah, so it's about if the panelists can share what has changed or is changing in regards to planning policy and legislation, and has there been a shift at all, particularly in the patriarchal society?
I wish I had a more positive answer. Aisha had such a positive answer, but from my lens, it hasn't really changed in the way that we think. We've got a lot of work to do. I think about a lot of the work I did, even when I was president of the American Planning Association, and even like our national conference falls during spring breaks a lot of the time. And then, you see that if it's during spring break, a lot of people can't attend, particularly women. I think a lot of we're dealing with even right now with our city council structure. We meet during the day, zoning board meets during the day, planning commission meets during the day. So we are still kind of a little archaic in that way. But when we think we are starting to have an equity focus on a lot of the work we do, we've got the American Planning Association recently did, well, a couple of years ago, zoning for equity. So we're starting to talk about it, but are we seeing it implemented in really big ways? Not really, at least not in the cities that I've lived in, and I'm mostly in larger cities. So
Yeah,
I
that's
wish
good.
I
I
could
mean,
be
I
more
think I
optimistic.
think some of the things you said were very positive, but you also have to be honest, right? So
Yeah.
you're doing a lot of great work. So maybe if we do a similar webinar in a couple of years, you'll have a little bit more to share.
Yes.
Um, yeah, and then Panina, if we can ask you the same question, and then specifically the question they did refer to open markets, particularly in the African context, um, lack form, functionality, and infrastructure to support women's needs, which you were talking about earlier, of course.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, it's the person. Sorry, I didn't read the name of the person who asked the question, but it's true because the markets were designed for vendors and shoppers, not this, and they also had the men in mind, right? But the reality is that you have women as the majority of the vendors and women of young, of reproductive age with children. So I would say maybe the win we are having in Kenya is that because of the implementation of the project that we are doing, we are now shaping up a policy. So what happened is that when we started providing childcare service in one of the markets, we realized that the room was so small, like it was in one tiny room of 2 meters by 1.8 meters, really tiny. So in fact, we just refurbished it to accommodate five kids, right? But before we knew it, children started flocking in there and became quite busy. And that led to us having a partnership with the government to allow us to scale the services to other markets. So going to the second market, we found that at least now the government had allocated a bigger space and had a toilet set aside. In terms of form and functionality, all the rest one was not considered. So that led to us initiating a policy approach whereby in support of IDRC and the Scaling Care Innovation, we are supporting Nairobi City County Government come up with standards and policies for how childcare services are provided in the market centers. It's a very small win. We realize that, fine, the market's already built up. If you look at our president's manifesto and all he's doing right now is launching markets and planning to do many more markets in the coming days. So if that has already been done and settled and fundraised for that they're in the construction phase, then how can we make sure that at least we can influence a small little design to have the daycare facility, which was not initially a part of the design, and most importantly have a certain minimum requirement or minimum standards to make sure that that daycare can function to cater for the children. So it's a draft policy that we have, and I'm happy to share with you maybe for further distribution. So that for me, that's a small win because you realize that before, and I think it's a planning reality globally. Once one policy is approved, it takes over 10 years for it to be reviewed. So also what we do is that through our experience, we look at policy windows, some of the ongoing policies that are maybe way more advanced in the approval process. Maybe they have gone through the county assembly, and we try to issue our memoranda. And most of the time, our memoranda has been accepted. So you try to push small policy statements in one policy to the other. And overall, in as much as yours is going to take longer to get adopted, at least the ones that are already adopted have already gone ahead and started achieving the objective. So that's what you're doing. I would say that planning process requires patience, but I think it's most importantly is giving evidence. Generating evidence is so important, so that now as you push it to the government, to the politicians especially, it also become something, it is packaged in a way that it helps them get reelected sometimes, or because they have the power, they're the people who influence even where the budgets go. So if you package a planning project or a policy in a way that it shows the gains, not just for the women but also the bigger public good, then it's easier to see budgets allocated, and hopefully we can make the world a more planned system. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you. Yeah, I think that you made so many great points. And I think even though it seems like a small win in terms of the speed of policy, which, as we all know, can be quite frustrating sometimes, I think just in terms of the people that it impacts, and even people listening to this webinar that might hear about the draft policy and then have an idea to do it in their context. So I think it's very critical work. All right, thank you so much to all of our amazing panelists. I'll give it over to you, Charlotte, for the conclusion.
Yeah, thank you. I've been asked to do reflections, which I always find so difficult because I'm trying to take on everything that everyone's saying. But thank you for such a rich discussion, and thank you to the audience for asking so many questions and being really engaged. I would just like to say thank you to I think the two founders of the Commonwealth Women in Planning Network for joining, as well as, these are two women in the audience. I won't embarrass them by naming them, but who have been pioneers, as Jenna said, doing work on gender mainstreaming, doing work on women and planning for, oh, I think since the 1980s, were one of them. So really lovely to have them here and to see that their work is not in vain and is continuing. Um, but I wish I could be so positive this morning. Before I started the first session, I saw a post from UN Women, and it said that no country or nation was anywhere near meeting gender equity. So this discussion feels even more timely. I think in this session, we particularly heard a lot about the importance of removing barriers for women to being able to participate in their communities, in their neighbourhoods, and in their city, especially economically. That really came through for me in this discussion. There was a lot of discussion about women being economically enabled through planning. We also had many sort of thoughts and comments on the need for engagement that is inclusive, to meet people where they are, to be intentional. Um, yeah, we had some variations, I thought, as well, and I thought this was quite interesting. So Aisha was talking about planning being very gender neutral and being written very gender neutrally as well. And we're seeing that in England actually as a nation. Our national policy is written from a gendered neutral perspective. So I can relate to that. But we also heard about gender being included in visions from Angela, which I thought was very interesting. So it's in the visions, it's in these strategies, but it's not making it down to legislation and implementation and fiscal decisions. So budgets are really important. So that's where that mainstreaming comes in. It's not necessarily just mainstreaming in planning policy documents or data, but it's right down to sort of the actual implementation and what we see on the ground. The importance of data came up, and this came up in the first session as well, but I think the conversation was quite different here. Sex disaggregated data is important, but what I found really interesting is about the importance of the age of the data. So it needs to be up to date, and if it's not, it's inequitable. And I thought that was a really key takeaway. We've only recently, I would say, well, we were working with our 2011 census in the UK for a long time, and it got updated in 2021, but it already feels out of date now. And that the analysis it needs to be gendered. So it's not enough just to have that data, it's the importance of acting on that gender disaggregated data and analysing it to be inclusive and used in evidence bases. Um, and that the use of the data and the data that is used needs somebody to be accountable. And I thought that was really, really interesting and quite different from this morning. But there's something that was said this morning that I thought was quite interesting to that particular point, if I can find it from earlier, um, where we discussed about it's not just the data, it is also um, why you're collecting it. What are you actually trying to evidence in the first place? What is that data actually being used for? So not just collecting it for collection's sake, it's got to have some meaning to it, some purpose, so that it can actually help you implement gender informed planning in the way that you wanted. But that was everything for me. I think there were some really great examples and case studies for people to take away, and I think this is the start probably of a joint series across ISOCARP and the Commonwealth Women in Planning networks, because it's been such a rich and wide and engaging discussion. So thank you.
Amazing. Thank you, Charlotte. Yeah, so we'll conclude there. Thank you so much, Penina, Angela, and Aisha, for your time. And well, I thank you, Sylvia, as well. I think we may have messed up on times or something, but hopefully you can join us and speak at the next one. And thank you, Charlotte, for organizing both of these panels and putting an incredible amount of work into this. And thank you all for joining us. So have a wonderful rest of your day or evening or afternoon. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Wonderful session.
Thank you. Bye-bye.